Hello. I'm just sitting outside. We're going to read chapter 17 of The Orphan of Ellis Island. You might hear some dogs because there's a dog in my neighborhood that is howling. He must think it's 8 p.m. Chapter 17. As they made their way down the hillside, the four boys kept a sharp lookout for the Padrone's search party. They hoped that Father Tomasio's mention of the north had worked, but they were still careful to stay well out of sight. After walking for what seemed like hours, they agreed to stop for rest. Shh, listen, Francisco whispered. You can still hear the bells. Dominic listened, and he could just make out the faint ringing of bells in the distance. We've never lived beyond the sound of the bell tower, Francisco said sadly. It will seem very strange not to hear them. Maybe they'll have a bell tower in New York, Antonio suggested. They all grew quiet again, listening for the familiar ring. I wonder how many men it would take to bury him, Salvador said suddenly. Who? Asked Antonio. Donzi, of course, Salvador answered. They're going to need a giant casket to hold him. Francisco nodded his head as he took the cloth sack from his back. Antonio pulled out the shoes and put them on. They looked awfully big for your little feet, Dominic couldn't help but notice. Antonio frowned. They were Papa's shoes, he said. They fit me best, Francisco admitted, but we take turns wearing them per mass on the feast days. Salvador and I have to stuff them with rags to make them fit, Antonio explained. Can I wear them now? He asked his brother. Now that we're going to America? No, you haven't any rags to stuff them with here. It's too far of a walk yet, Francisco told him. I'll carry them in the pack, and when we reach America, you can put them on. Why does he get to wear them and not me? Salvador snapped, pounding his chest with his fist and pulling one of the shoes off of Antonio's foot. Your feet smell worse than mine, Antonio reported as they tried to get the shoe back. Stop it, you two, Francisco ordered. How many times must I tell you about sharing? Now, why can't you figure this out yourselves? I can figure it out, Antonio bragged. I'll wear this shoe, and he can wear that one. Dominic grinned and Francisco shook his head. As ridiculous as the two donkeys trying to pull a cart from both ends, Francisco sighed. What will you do when you get to America and you don't have me to settle your squabbles? This question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. What will we do without you, Francisco? Antonio whimpered. But Francisco got hold of himself quickly. You'll do your best to remember, no matter where we go, we are always family. This is not the end of the Candinos, he smiled. It's just the beginning of the Candinos in America. We will be a family there too, I promise. Everyone seemed to brighten at this thought. And they once again set off on the path down the hillside. Antonio did his best to keep with Salvador, who was practically running. He was so anxious to see the ship. It was only Francisco who kept stopping and turning around, keeping a constant watch for the Padrone's men. With the village finally out of their sight and the bells out of earshot, Francisco began talking to Violeta, who would often comment with a nod of her head or a blink of her eye. I wonder what the journey on the ship will be like, Salvador said excitedly. I hope Violeta doesn't get sick, Francisco worried. She's never been out to sea before. Neither have we, Salvador explained. You're not as sensitive as a goat, Francisco told him. No one is as sensitive as your Violeta, Salvador said. Dominic understood Francisco's concern. If he had Violeta for a pet, he would have felt the same way. With the crimson sun sinking low behind the line of the cedar trees, Francisco decided that they had best make camp for the night. It's no more than 2-hour walk from here to the harbor, he said, but I don't want to get to the city at nightfall. The streets are known to be dangerous after dark. There are thieves and cutthroats about them. So we'll sleep here and leave at night. And leave at the first light tomorrow morning. With all the fresh air and excitement they had had that day, Dominic's hunger had grown worse. No one else mentioned food or the lack of it. Dominic guessed that they were used to going hungry. They made a soft bed of pine needles and everyone lay down. As the sky filled the stars with silvery moon hung above them, they talked in their hushed whispers about the journey that they were about to make. I wonder if there are stars in the sky over America, Antonio muttered. It's not another planet, Dominic said. Of course there are stars in the sky, but sometimes you can't see them because of the pollution from the cars and the light from the stadium lamps. Pollution? Cars? Stadium lamps? What are those? Francisco asked. Dominic hesitated, not knowing how to answer. You see, in the America I know, there are lots of cars that you ride in all around, but no horses. Horseless carriages? Salvador asked. We've heard of them. Yeah, well, in America, I know everyone has one, and they make the air very dirty. And the lamps are bright orange lights that use they use at night to control crime. Everyone grew quiet at his remark. What else do you know of America? Salvador asked. Dominic hesitated, not knowing how to answer. Well, I guess I know a lot, he finally admitted. Maybe he had relatives who went there before the earthquake, Francisco whispered to Salvador. That's probably how he knows so much. We got it mixed up in his head that he wasn't here himself. Neopoloni's cousin told us that the streets of America are paved with gold, Antonio said. But his uncles went there and didn't find any. Emelina thought that maybe they were looking on the wrong street, Salvador continued. But then they wrote to her mother to say that there were only horse manure on the streets, like here. So which is it? Salvador asked. Gold or manure? We'll read chapter 18 tomorrow.